one thing I never wanted to do is start an agency. And what we just did is start an agency. So it's really funny. How we work with clients is we put a lot into the research phase, which helps us with the creative, but also with the target group. What are the hooks, the needs, the problems that we solve? So, usually the low hanging fruits in search is because people have a need, they search for you, and then in that moment you can be there. But on YouTube, you can also use that and just push out videos to them.
Welcome to the week's episode of the Messenger Mastermind podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jeremy Horowitz, and today I'm joined by another incredible guest, someone who I've been talking with a lot on LinkedIn and is a great LinkedIn follow if you're looking for good content. So without further ado, allow me to introduce Christian Hopp, the co-founder of Forward Agency. Christian, how's it going?
Thanks so much, Jeremy. Really nice to meet you eventually and speaking to you.
Yeah, I feel like we've been talking on LinkedIn for so long that I know you, although this is the first conversation we're ever having. So I'm really excited to dive in today. Before we do, one question I'd love to ask everybody: how did you get into this crazy game of e-com?
That's a good question. Actually, I think I just, when I finished school, I didn't want to get into a job and I just started freelancing without any experience and without any clients, which was not a good idea to some extent, but also quite interesting and was just learning by doing. And so now 12 years later, I'm still in the industry. It's been a very nice ride.
Yeah, I started a company in college as well, and it's something I would never recommend to somebody else, but I would also say a pivotal and a huge learning part of my career as well. So if anybody isn't familiar with you or Forward Agency yet, can you just give a quick background on what you're doing, what you're focusing on, and really what's your main priority right now?
Sure, yeah. So my last D2C company was Waterdrop, which was Austrian-based startup, and been there building the whole online D2C last 2.5 years. And one channel that, at some point we were stuck with Facebook and influencer as many. And we were asking ourselves, okay, what is the next channel? And so we gave YouTube a try. We burned 100K euros at a ROAS of, I think, 0.04. Worked with 5 Google representatives, video specialists and everything. And we thought, okay, that can't be the solution. Even a 30% brand lift is not what we want. And then for the next 12 months, we just experimented with YouTube and drove it at I think, ROAS of 1.92 at the end. And we just thought, okay, it's actually too good not to share it with others, what we found. So, because there was a lot of learnings. And so we just started the agency, and now we work with e-coms mostly in Europe to make YouTube a new acquisition channel on direct response.
Very cool. I have to ask, what were the major lessons from burning 100,000 euros in ad spend? What were those major learnings?
Google, had probably good intents, but in the end, we found that it's a mixture between creative. Most companies, I think, use TV spots on YouTube. They are 20, 30 seconds. And that's not the ideal format. YouTube works completely different in terms of creative. And also YouTube has a lot of targeting options. I think most brands still see YouTube as a brand awareness channel, which it can be probably. But if you see it on direct response, you really have to go into targeting. It has way more targeting options than Facebook, for example, and also get the creative right.
Okay, there's a bunch of things I want to dive into there. I think let's talk about the targeting first, because I feel like this is where everybody kind of this is way more work than Facebook. I don't really want to go through all this. It's really complicated. So how have you found an effective framework or process to really figure out hey, this is either the whitelisting or the targeting that we want to do on YouTube that we think are going to be the most effective?
Yeah. How we work with clients is we put a lot into the research phase, which helps us with the creative, but also with the targeting. So there's a bunch of questions that we ask to then determine, okay, what is the target group? What are the hooks, the needs, the problems that we solve? But the benefit or the difference between YouTube and Facebook is that YouTube also has intent targeting, right? Because they can access all the search queries that happen on Google and also on YouTube, which Facebook obviously doesn't. So apart from demographics and interests or affinity targeting, you can also target intents, which is very different and a lot more powerful. So usually the low-hanging fruits in search is because it's people have a need, they search for you, and then in that moment you can be there. But on YouTube, you can also use that intent and just push out videos to them. So we found this is, if you use that in a smart way, then this is very powerful.
Cool. Okay. It sounds a little very similar to like Google Shopping as well, where you already know that they're looking for something specific. So where would you recommend that somebody started? Like we have maybe 50, 100K that we were going to spend on Facebook or somewhere else that we want to move into YouTube. Like what's the first thing that we should do to test out how viable the channel is?
Yeah. So YouTube definitely has a higher entry barrier because you have to produce a video, which is obviously more effort and higher cost than maybe a Facebook creative. But definitely, the minimum spend, I think, is probably depends on the market, but 20K media spend, and you have to think of a production which doesn't have to be super high quality, but around 5 to 10K. So that's probably the entry barrier. And again, we find the most valid hook where we think, okay, that has the strongest hook that we can test, or the strongest angle, and then we define the hook into different messages, and we just test the first bunch of creatives and see how that goes. And then we can go from there into different other different angles and see what overall works best.
Okay, so and someone who is currently advertising on YouTube, something I always think about is do you start with the targeting and then create the creative for the targeting use case that you want to go down, or do you do the reverse and we have great creative and now let's just try to figure out where in the targeting this will actually pan out?
Yeah, it's a good question actually. I think it's a challenge for any channel, but Facebook, it's mostly broad targeting. So I guess it's the creative first, and then you see how the targeting can fit. But again, it's a combination. So we ask, what is the biggest problem that can solve for the consumer, for the customer, and then you base the creative on that, but you also base the targeting on that. So I think for YouTube it goes hand in hand in terms of creative and targeting a bit.
Okay, and you've mentioned customer research a couple of times, and I feel like a lot of people can get away with not really understanding their customer on Facebook, and used to, and then could just throw up ads. So like how in depth, like what type of customer research do you feel like you? Let me put it two ways. There's the Burger King example, and then there's the Michelin star restaurant of customer research. Like, where do you think in that scale you need to be to really understand your customer well enough to figure out how to plug ads into YouTube for it to actually be valuable in return, have direct response returns?
I guess it depends a bit. So YouTube works best if you really have a very specific intent. So that's why, for example, B2B or something works really, really well on YouTube. You see all these ads. I'm sure you also see that, I'm just in, I don't know, somewhere on the beach. This is my Lamborghini and I teach you how to make money in 2 weeks. I guess we all have seen these ads. The thing is, what we keep seeing them because they work, they target a very specific audience. So if you have a very specific need, then you can target. We have one brand that we work with. They sell socks and underwear. Everybody kinds of needs that. So it's very hard to pinpoint, and the customer research is more difficult to do it because, I didn't think you can talk 2 minutes in a video about why you should buy an underwear, very normal, basic underwear, socks. So it really depends. Of course, the more effort you put into it, the better the return. And I think if you're, as you said, if you're used to advertise on Facebook, you don't have very specific hooks, you can just target broad. You really need to take a step back and think of what can be the reasons that customers should buy your product. So it's more effort here.
Yeah. So we're getting into that more like classic fundamentals of almost like a sales letter. We just need to map this out.
Yeah.
So from the creative side, I mean, I've heard everybody debate that it needs to be under 15 seconds, that it needs to be over 2 minutes long. Like, how do you think about structuring the creative so that somebody isn't pulling their hair out and can, reasonably produce something to get going? Obviously, down the road, like bigger budgets can allow you to do bigger productions.
Personally, I'm on this side that we think that 2 minutes and longer is ideal. Actually, recently Google announced that if you have a video that is longer than 3 minutes, it will kind of punish you. So your CPMs will go up. So actually it should be around 2 to 3 minutes. And the reason is, it's I think you can really make use of the 30 seconds that a view counts if you view a video 30 seconds or 100%, whatever comes first. So if you just show 15 seconds, it's kind of wasting time, and you can really make use of that 95% or more have sound on. I don't know the actual numbers in the US, or but I think it's really high number. And you can really tell a story, and so I'm definitely a fan of 2 minutes. We have not seen any shorter videos work on return on ad spend or direct response, to be honest.
None. So like solely 2 minute plus. You don't buy into the whole like it needs to be sub 30
No,
seconds, sub 15
no,
seconds for that to work.
no, no. I mean, I'm happy to hear the arguments for that, but we haven't found it work.
Okay. Yeah, neither have I. And I also just feel like how much of a story can you really tell in like 20 seconds? So
Exactly.
yeah, and then what do you think of type of creative? Because I noticed that I watch an inordinate amount of YouTube like as a consumer, and I always find that like at least as a consumer, the highly produced ads never like I'm always just
Exactly.
waiting on like the skip ad button versus the stuff that looks like I kind of like this, like it looks like I shot it and it's like over in the corner is stuff that I gravitate towards. Have you found that like certain types of production quality, like shot on a computer or an iPhone versus a high production, really make like a big difference
Yeah.
in performance?
Yeah, I think we made the same experience as you just mentioned. Like high production videos performed less good than lower production videos. But it's also not, this kind of UGC videos that you've been seeing across Facebook too much. So this probably it's not very authentic either. But this typical UGC Facebook videos, it's also not something that we found working. But it's more like it can be shot on an iPhone, definitely. Can be lower quality production and lower cost, which is good. We spent, for example, for one production, we spent, I think, 35K. It performed less than, it was basically the same script, performed less than a 5K production. So,
Okay. Yeah. So it's so funny. So way back in the day when we were doing like early Instagram ads, we found the same thing where like we could spend 10, 15 grand on a photo shoot or give somebody an iPhone and like give them $50. And the second option always crushed the first one.
yeah.
So I'm very happy to see that trend just continue across
Uh,
every other channel because for years people didn't believe me. They're like, no way. Like you have to keep investing. And we're like, listen, the data is the data. So that actually is kind of what I want to transition to next of I feel like so many brands have such a tough time quantifying performance or figuring out what metrics, especially for direct response marketers,
yeah.
like what their metrics should be on YouTube to figure out if it's working or not. So what have you all found? Like, is it an impact on another channel?
Mm.
Is it lead capture? Like, how have you found those? What direct response metrics have you put in place to find out YouTube's efficacy?
Yeah, it's a good point. So I'm a big fan of zero party data and, measuring with post purchase service. I mean, we've been measuring TV, impact of TV with post-purchase service. When we went into new markets, we saw that if we advertise or focus on one specific channel, that this is like 85% of the responses. So it really, like every sense check that we did, we found that post-purchase survey data and zero-party data was really, really accurate. And so we also started measuring YouTube on post-purchase survey data. So we also measure return on ad spend based on the post-purchase survey. Interestingly, it's one of the channels where the data that you see in Google Ads is very close to post-purchase survey. So I would say maybe 5 to 10% difference in most cases, while Facebook sometimes can vary a lot. Yeah, exactly. So that's surprising, but it also tells us that it's not only generating demand, but it's really also direct response.
Yeah, it's just shocking that Google isn't trying to over attribute more sales to get people to spend more money on the channel. Which it must be refreshing. It's probably the only channel that doesn't do that. How do you see the other channel? Like, how do the other channels play in? Like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of pops on Facebook, TikTok. I always hear brands talk about how that pushes SEO and that pushes their Google search.
Yeah.
How do you see like when YouTube is running and you guys are like have a good ad really running and putting budget behind it? How does that impact the other channels that you're running at the same time?
Yes, but it's very hard to measure. Be honest, like the incremental uplift, because it's like not in most cases it was not the only marketing channel that we pushed. And although it was significant in terms of revenue percentage, like maybe 20, 30, sometimes even 40% of new customer revenue, it's still hard to measure, the impact on, because it's not a channel that we scaled from 0 to 100. I think YouTube is different to Facebook, that you can't increase like from 0 to 10,000 budget a day, but it goes slower, but then also more steadily. So I would say, honestly, I don't feel confident to just say that it drives search. Probably it does, but I don't feel comfortable to say like we measure that with absolute certainty.
Okay, but you still feel like the channel stands up on its own, and you feel like it's
Yeah,
strong enough that it doesn't really matter if it like. I
yeah,
mean, all marketing impacts other marketing, but
exactly.
it doesn't really matter because there's enough revenue opportunity there.
And we also saw that there's less overlap. Facebook and influencer, we often have this debate that you know is if influencer campaigns are stronger, like we spend more on influencer, does Facebook now automatically attribute more, or is it like really an incremental uplift? I think the overlap between, of course, because it's the same platform, kind of is much higher than YouTube and Facebook, or YouTube and Instagram.
Yeah, because it's such a different like, and I guess that's my other question is like, do you see similar customers or do you see similar trends across what I'll call the traditional social media channels in YouTube, or is it like two separate channels? Because I don't really think YouTube is a social media channel. I really think of it as like early connected TV, but it is kind of a social media channel. So
Yeah.
like, how do you think about that? Do you see the trends across both?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the interesting thing is, I think some might think that YouTube drives cheaper traffic or something, but we found that the session duration and pages per session, so the qualitative metrics on site are actually higher, significantly higher than Facebook or other paid social channels. So the kind of traffic that you drive is very high. People spend more time on the site, and yeah, so also the CPCs are pretty similar. So YouTube is not a channel that can outperform magically, I think. So if your Facebook campaigns don't bring return, don't expect YouTube, to perform at 10x. But it can be an additional channel that performs very similar to Facebook or other top channels.
Yeah, and I just feel like I don't know, I've never actually scaled the YouTube channel that far, but I just feel like once you hit a certain breakpoint, it's actually so much more scalable than Facebook, assuming that you know how to do the targeting properly because it's just such a I mean, it's whatever, like 19 billion hours of content or whatever insane number it is today. Like there's so many more opportunities versus just like exhaust Facebook audience, launch new Facebook audience, put old creative back, put new creative into old Facebook audience and just play that game over and over again. So like
Yeah.
have you ever seen that breakpoint where it's like almost kind of like the way that audience of a brand grows, where it's like
Mm.
early adopters, but then as you scale out, there are new pockets and new ways to extend your ad space out and just find those new audiences that you can
Exactly.
bring in.
Yeah, exactly. Like one difference also is that YouTube is the ad fatigue doesn't happen too fast. So I think on Facebook you have to exchange creatives way more often, way more frequently. On YouTube you can run. We had some top performers run for a year or so, or almost a year. So even spending a few hundred K a month. So that's significant, I think. And yeah, definitely. I mean, you start, of course, targeting a more narrow audience, and then you go broader. So, of course, with scale, you will lose some of the efficiency. But as you said, the audience is just really, really large. So
Yeah, and they're just consuming so many more hours of
yeah,
just
sure,
content in general.
sure.
And I also find myself like instead of watching a half hour or an hour TV show, I'll watch the exact same amount of time of like 8-minute YouTube videos.
That's
And
a
I
good
don't know
point.
why. Like I would waste the same amount of time doing
Yeah.
either thing, but for some reason, I don't know, in my mind, I can just like burn through YouTube videos a lot more. I guess we've been talking a lot about what you do well on the channel. What are some things that like make you pull your hair out or that you see people do all the time and you're like, oh, please stop doing this?
Well, use short creatives. I think, bumper ads or anything like this. I'm just really like, or I mean, the worst thing is just really take your TV spot, TV commercial, and put it on YouTube because, and think you can just run awareness campaigns and expect returns. I think, it's totally different to run a TV commercial and YouTube is just two different worlds. So
Yeah. Anything else? Anything from the like targeting or the way people approach the channel outside of just migrating their TV spots over?
well, I think targeting, it's hard to judge from outside. So it's hard to say if you see an ad.
Kind of.
You think so?
Forever 21 has been sending me a lot of bralettes and like clothes that are clearly I'm not going to wear. So
Okay.
I feel like there are some
Okay, great.
targeting things that they
Fair
can be
point.
doing better.
Fair point. Haven't seen those to be honest. No, but of course, in terms of how the creative is built, some start directly with the USBs and kind of tell you purchase this because it's good. Purchase, purchase, purchase. Of course, that's not how I would build a creative. I would first talk about, that's maybe one interesting part is you want to make people put the thumb off the skip button, right? Everyone has the thumb on the skip button once they see an ad, and you want to make them move away and spend the time to watch the ad, but also you want to clean out everyone who's not interested. So it's not only keep the interest, keep the interest, keep the interest, but after 5 seconds it's also your turn to if you know that you have a price sensitive audience, or your product actually it's not made for a price sensitive audience, you should talk about the price. You should talk about those objections that you clean out the people, and those people skip that are not your ideal customers, because you want to build basically an audience of pre-qualified customers or users when they reach the 30 seconds. And I think that's also a difference to Facebook. You pay, I don't know, $1, $2 a click. I don't know how it's in US at the moment, maybe more in some cases, but you pay like 5 cents, 10 cents for a view, which is 30 seconds video view with sound on. So really to build this pre-qualified audience, I think it's very important.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I love talking about this topic. How do you convince brands you've either worked with in the past or clients to have the confidence to have that filter and to not be hey, we need to be able to accommodate everybody and we don't want to repel anybody or turn anybody away in those types of ads?
Yeah, it's a good point. But we just translate the points into an outline and say, this is the ideal script and this is the reason why we should do it that way. And it's just what performs. If you don't do that, it's hard. You have to you bring traffic to the website that actually doesn't convert. It doesn't make sense in the long run. Yeah.
Well, I feel like every marketer agrees with you. I don't know about
Yeah.
every brand owner
Yeah. True.
slash operations people slash other people. I feel like that's like one of the things of like I feel like I've done this in the past. Where like, sure, we can test it, and just like
Yeah.
obviously knowing that the one that's built properly will perform better. So like, have you found any effective tactics? And asking for a friend here, have you found any effective tactics to like help convince the teams that you've worked with to like no, this is the proper construction and this is why like this is the science behind the art of what we're doing.
I have to say, so far we've been very lucky with brands that
Oh,
trust
you've been
us.
really lucky,
Yeah.
man.
With this. But I mean, yeah, you otherwise you can see it. You can see it in the numbers, I guess. If brands want to burn some money and don't trust you on that, I think the numbers will speak for themselves. So latest after the first version of creative testing, I guess there will be some, hopefully, people who understand the numbers or trust the numbers more. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, how you would do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I've ever successfully done this in the past. So I feel like I have a bunch of different strategies that take them with a grain of salt. So, I mean, at a certain point, I'm a big believer that like all good ideas come from somewhere and you can test it. And so what we usually like to do is just shoot a bunch of extra creative so that maybe if it's not in the hook, we put it somewhere else so that team like stakeholder feels like they've been heard, they've been like they're happy with the result, but you're not
Right.
actually like burning too much budget on that. And then the second thing is like at one point I literally for the company I used to work for like held a class for an hour where I invited everybody on the team to come to the meeting and like walk them through proper ad construction and like step by step. It's like, here's why we do this. Like I tried to give essentially like a 1 hour version of like a marketing MBA, like an advertising MBA class. Like this is what direct response advertising is. I mean, it was fun. I don't know that was super effective. But yeah, I think it's just so interesting. I think so many brands are going to get into YouTube that the other big thing that I'm thinking about, and I'd love to get your perspective on this, is how do you see connected TV? Like a lot of noise is being made about Roku and some of these other newer Hulu and some of these newer platforms. Like, how do you see this fitting in? Because I guess at least I see it as like YouTube is like the stepping stone from social media to get to that new advertising channel.
Definitely. I think it's necessary. Many brands are looking for different channels. We also did. We also had a lot of success on TV. So I think in Europe it's still a few years behind or a few months behind. So it's not the same level as in the US, I guess. But absolutely, yeah, YouTube is definitely an entry to connected TV.
Yeah, that actually brings up a good point. I don't usually have a ton of your opinions on the show, so I'd love to ask, like, what is it just gonna graft where it's like Hulu and what I assume eventually will be Disney Plus and Roku and a bunch of other, well, I guess it may not even be Roku. I'm not sure if Roku is the big player there, but like, what are the big connected TV providers, or are there completely different ones that if an American brand wants to expand over into the EMEA market, they need to think about?
I think we're not that far in Europe. I mean, honestly, I think it will take some time to find out what will be the players. The challenge of Europe is always that it's very fragmented. So I think it's way easier for a European brand to. No, don't want to say it's more easy because US is also very different to tackle, but it's different. For we are used to have a very fragmented market. You have very different strategies in different countries. We have countries that don't speak English that well. We have other countries that are okay with that. So, some like the Nordics countries, there are like 5 million people living there. It's very very small countries. The good thing is there's less competition, so it's also once you go there, it's easy, but it's a lot more effort. And the same is with connected TV providers. I think we will have to see how it will play out.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So there's no like central marketplace, right? Like, so if you want to bid across 15 different countries even in the EU, like you have to go and like go to each provider, set everything up, and then I'm sure all the like internationalization, customization that you would need to go through
Exactly,
anyway.
exactly. It's the same even for normal marketing channels. We found, countries like Italy, they went okay. I mean, they were really, really small when we did them in English, had a rest of Europe store where we had all the countries there. Once we localized it, went into Italian as a local language, it really started to boom. And you kind of have to do that. So you also have to do that with the creative. You have to see what are the local providers. So I don't think it's a plug and play and there's one hub or so that you can go with.
Yeah, man, I thought advertising for the east to west coast in the middle of America was a difficult challenge. So in wrapping up, I have a couple questions that I love to ask everybody. I think I'm gonna get some great answers out of you. So one piece of content you'd recommend everybody listening consume. It can be any type of content you want. The only caveat is it cannot be your own.
Wow, it's a very good question. I mean, recently I tapped again into brand story. I think that nowadays it's super critical to differentiate yourself not only through price and to work on your brand story. I think is something that there's a lot of potential for many brands. And yeah, that's just something I started reading again, but there could be many.
The Donald Miller book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and if anybody wants a good framework for how to build direct response copywriting, I literally use that book for my
Really,
hour-long lesson. I was
oh,
talking
nice.
about it. Yeah, because it is like the good like transition of like hardcore like direct response,
Yeah,
but a very like friendly, I would say, easy entry point like framework for a lot of people who may not have that background to understand. Second question for you: if you could go back to 12 years ago, the Christian who was just starting out, what's one lesson that you would impress upon yourself that if you had to do everything over again, you would make sure you got perfectly right the second time?
it's more probably on a career choice. I think I stayed a long time in agencies, which is nice, but I really started learning once I changed to startups and really did. It's different if you work in an agency than otherwise. So I would definitely be quicker on that change. Yeah.
Interesting, though, but you went back to an agency after working for a brand.
Yeah, exactly. So I think one thing I never wanted to do is start an agency. And what we just did is start an agency. So it's really funny.
So yeah, it's funny how big shift where it's like, I never want to do this again. And then after you have the other experience, it's like, I love this and I want to go back to it. My other question for you is who's someone else we should have on the show? Like, who's a great conversation that would really be like a good learning lesson for everybody who's listening?
Yeah, I don't know if you had Adam Kitchen on the show.
Big fan of that. Yeah, we had him on last year.
Okay, yeah, Adam is like one of people I really respect a lot. Juliana Jackson. I don't know if you had her on the show.
Okay, from CXL, we haven't yet. We're still working on that one.
Yeah, would highly recommend.
Cool, awesome. Last question for you: if anybody wants to learn more about yourself or the Forward Agency, where should they go?
Sure. Like best way to reach out is probably LinkedIn, or we also have Forward, which is without an R .agency, but LinkedIn is always fine.
Awesome. Yeah. And a great follow. I feel like we're talking almost, I feel like we kind of talk almost every day on LinkedIn, just from like from
Almost.
each other's posts and everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, Christian's a great follow. So we really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks for listening to another week's episode of the Messenger Mastermind podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with another e-commerce marketer. And always let us know what you think down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe. If you're looking for cutting edge tactics and the resources that we rely on to run our businesses, sign up for our newsletter. We'll include a link down below. As always, stay confident, connect with your customers, and keep crushing it.